and we've got a big one this weekend. Number 2, Ohio State comes to Autzen Stadium for the first time since, I think, 1967, the second game ever played at Autzen Stadium. So it's been a long time coming. NBC broadcast. I think this is the first time Oregon's ever been on NBC as well, so a lot of firsts for this one. It's also the first, from at least from an Oregon record book standpoint, I think they go by the AP, of a number 2 versus number 3 matchup at Autzen Stadium as well. It's just a massive game. 4:30 kick, NBC, like we said. All 3 of us will be there. It's the hardest ticket to get into unless money is not a thing for you and you can just drop a couple grand like nobody's business. That it's a hard ticket. It's a hard ticket for our credential. Like we were talking with Dave Biddle of our Ohio State site yesterday, and I was telling him that, you know, the credentials for this game are through the roof. Oregon can't handle as many people that have requested to come cover this football game.
Matt, it's literally through the roof because people will be on the roof covering this game, we should say.
That's very true. We've seen one practice this week. Dan Lanning shut down practice access on Wednesday. Read into that as you wish. But nonetheless, it's a game where this has been circled by everybody. And it was, can Ohio State, can they go unscathed through their first 5 games and meet together undefeated? And they've done it. I think Oregon's journey has probably been a little more bumpy than Ohio State's. But I think you could also argue like Ohio State really hasn't been tested by anybody. They haven't really faced even like a middle tier offense this season. But what they have done that Oregon hasn't is they've played inferior talent. You can't control that. And they've dominated. They are statistically, I think, the best team in the country. They're unbelievably good on both sides of the football.
Yeah, statistically, there's like no holes to poke, right? Like usually we're doing this podcast and we're like, yeah, this team is good in this area, but you really look at this area statistically and it's not quite as good. And this is a team where across the board, it's like top 2 in the Big Ten, top 2 in the Big Ten, top 5 in the country, top 10 in the country, just that kind of statistical, I guess, resume so far. And to your point, Matt, like, and this is my through line all week, which has been neither of these teams have played anybody anywhere near as good as the opponent they're playing. And so, well, I don't say you throw the stats out the window. Some of that is I'm still curious on, for both Oregon and Ohio State, where do all these strengths actually lie in a game where the opposition is just a lot better and there's Sunday players everywhere. So we'll get into a lot of the specifics. That's kind of a big thing for me. I think there's a couple of areas where Oregon has a chance to exploit some things that have been strengths for Ohio State. And I think there's some areas where the inverse is true, where Ohio State certainly has some talent that is capable of making parts of Oregon's offense and defense that have looked good, not look very good, and maybe take advantage of them in kind of a unique way. So really excited for this one. Pretty cool, to Matt's point about like in the preseason kind of talking about this game, thinking hopefully both teams go 5-0. Not only that, but the seas kind of parted last weekend where everything went right to make this 2 versus 3 with a couple of just very much unexpected upsets, kind of paving the way for this to be 2 versus 3. And here we are with, I think, the entirety of the country curious and wanting to see this. There's the level of uniqueness of a Big Ten game between Oregon and Ohio State that was always going to be there. But the fact that these are 2 of the remaining undefeated teams that have taken care of business to this point adds just a nice little kind of edge to it. And doing national radio this week, like you can just get a sense that there's a lot of people really curious to see what happens on Saturday and kind of who comes up out on top, because whoever that is obviously has the edge for the Big Ten championship to at least make it to Indy.
Yeah, this matchup is exactly what everybody's been hoping for since the schedules were officially announced. Everybody had this circled on their calendar. Both teams in the offseason went through and had a bunch of guys go to the NFL, but also went through the transfer portal and added a bunch of talent, went through the high school ranks and added a bunch of talent. Like these are 2 of the top, 4 or 5 most talented teams in the country. When you add them in with Texas and Georgia and maybe another team, it's going to be the biggest regular season game of the year until, maybe there's another top 5 matchup later down the line with with maybe one of these schools in Ohio State or Oregon, or maybe it's another SEC battle like it was with Georgia and Alabama earlier in the season. So I think this is hopefully going to live up to expectations. I think everybody would like to see this one be a close game until, the fourth quarter or even the very finish. Those are the worst opportunities when it is a top 5 matchup and it is a blowout one way or the other. And then you're just like, well, that was, one team was so clearly better than the other. But we're going to learn a lot about both of these teams, like Erik said earlier, where they haven't played the best competition. I think the best matchup from Ohio State has been Iowa. I think the best matchup from Oregon has been Boise State. Like, those are good teams. Are they great teams? No. Are one of these two teams going to be great on Saturday? Probably. And so that's going to be the ultimate difference maker with these two teams. Is just, like Erik said, where does the strengths lie? Who's actually good where? Do these numbers actually back up their performance on the field against a team who's good at whatever it is that they do? So I'm excited to watch it all play out. I'm excited to watch Ohio State. I'm excited to watch Oregon go against a really good team with some of the things that they were struggling in earlier in the season. Now they've kind of fixed it up, and especially against a team where the problems that Oregon may have are some of the strengths that Ohio State may have against them. So I think it'll be really interesting to tell, what Dan Lanning and the coaching staff do for adjustments at either halftime or come in pregame, where you watch the first drive of either offense or defense and you notice a new wrinkle or something like that, where like, hey, they didn't show this all season, but now it's Ohio State week and they're going to show up everything in their playbook. So I don't know. I think it'll be a fun time on Saturday in Autzen Stadium.
I'm real curious to see how each offensive line unit kind of handles the other defensive line. For me, that's like one of my biggest storylines, because you look at Ohio State and look, PFF is, I think, great from like a 10,000 foot perspective of looking at it, but game by game, it can kind of create some weird, funky rankings. But Ohio State has played just 2 players in the top 200 of their defensive line and edge ranking perspective. Oregon has faced 4. There are 6 players in the top 200 of PFF's rankings along the defensive line that are playing in this game. Like, the talent on both sides of the football is astronomically high. And how does Poncha, Oregon's starting sophomore center, handle lining up against Williams of Ohio State, who is an All-American, who is going to be a guy that NFL scouts are going to draft extremely high? How does Oregon's offensive tackles handle their edge guys and Sawyer and JTT? And then on the flip side, like, we've seen the implements of Chip Kelly's offense. Their run game seems to be improved, but their passing game is electric. But what happens if Will Howard doesn't have time because of Jordan Birch and because of Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell? Like, Oregon's defensive line is loaded as well. I think that's kind of a storyline that's kind of flown under the radar a little bit. We'll get a good feel if it's true or not, if this defensive line is as good as we think it is. And to your guys' points, like, they played solid but not great teams, and now they're playing a defense that's elite. And who's the offensive line that buckles first? Who gives up the big sack that leads to a fumble? What happens there is going to be a huge storyline for me.
That might be my top one too, Matt. That's a really good one, because I think both offensive lines, to your point, like in the offseason, I just remember being at Big Ten Media Day and I was trying to get a feel for all the teams Oregon was playing. I'm like, where are the weaknesses? In Ohio State, every one of the guys I talked to, 2 or 3, were like, it's probably the offensive line. There's not a lot of weaknesses on this defense. This offense has so many good skill players. They talked about Will Howard maybe just being a little erratic and maybe not what they were used to at Ohio State, which of course is like CJ Stroud and Justin Fields and these first round quarterbacks. But it was the offensive line, and just kind of the way that they performed late last season was kind of concerning. They went out and added some players in the portal, one of which was a guy who was playing at Alabama who had kind of snap issues late in the season. So there was just kind of overarching concerns. And through 5 games, they've looked awesome. Like, there's been, to Matt's point, like, you look through, like, this looks like one of the best offensive lines in the country. They also haven't faced guys like Oregon, right? And so, like, how does that stack up? And then on the flip side, we know what bad offensive line play looks like for Oregon. We saw it the first 2 games this year, and we think they've turned a corner, but have they turned a corner, or have they just played Oregon State, UCLA, and Michigan State, who collectively, I'm not saying that they have better or less talent on the defensive line than like Boise State or Idaho. That's not what I'm saying, but they certainly don't have this type of talent that we're going to see on Saturday. So, I think really because of the skill talent for both of these offenses, I think it has to be like near the top of both defensive coordinators kind of, keys to the game to really impact these passers. We've seen Dillon turn the ball over the last couple of games. Will Howard has historically been somebody that does turn it over. When we had Patrick Murphy on the pod the other day, he was talking about like, this is a guy who's probably going to put the ball into play a couple of times. I think whichever defensive line, and it might be both of them, is able to make it ugly and difficult and speed up the passer is probably going to have a pretty big edge in this game. And that could be for Oregon, who is the betting underdog, is nationally, I think, seen as the lesser team. And I think probably rightfully so based upon past performance. Is it possible Oregon can stop Ohio State from really getting into a rhythm, really finding its footing because of Oregon's pass rush? And I think that has to be something like if Oregon is going to win this game, you have to come out of it saying the Oregon pass rush won enough to make Will Howard uncomfortable. And the flip side, you have to say the Oregon offensive line protected Dillon Gabriel enough where he was able to be comfortable and throw the ball around the field. We've seen the difference with Dillon when he's comfortable, 0 sacks the last 3 games, as opposed to when he's being pressured all the time the first couple of games. And even those red zone situations were plays where it wasn't necessarily the offensive line broke down, but when he has to create and try to do things and it's not the first read, that's where some of the issues kind of creep up. So I'm with you, Matt. I think that's right near the top is which offensive line is ready to stack up against clearly the best defensive line talent that played all year.
Yeah, I think my biggest storyline kind of flows into the defensive line versus offensive line battle. And just for me, I'm more interested to see how Oregon's secondary handles, real talent on the outside in Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Carnell Tate. All 3 former five-star recruits. We all know about Emeka Egbuka, who's been a multi-year starter at Ohio State, but Jeremiah Smith has been an absolute transcendent talent at the wide receiver position as a true freshman in 2024. He's got over 400 yards. He's got 4 or 5 touchdowns, if my memory serves me correct. And Carnell Tate, who was injured last week, is expected to come back this week against Oregon. So that'll be another weapon that they can add. But, Oregon hasn't really been tested in its secondary this season. And in games where they've thrown the ball a lot, it's been with Boise State because I think Boise State had like 40 pass attempts. And there were a couple plays where Boise State was able to beat Oregon secondary deep, but that'll happen on any game, like literally against anybody. So in this game, though, there's going to be real talent. This reminds me a lot of Oregon and Washington last season, where one of the teams has real NFL talent at one of the positions, and the other team has maybe some NFL talent at the position. And it's clear Ohio State has the NFL talent on wideout, and Oregon has Jabbar Muhammad and maybe some NFL talent in the back end with Tysheem Johnson, or I don't know. I don't like that. That's kind of it. So, and you look at last year where it's, Jalen Polk and Roma Doomsday and whose name I'm forgetting already. The third wide receiver there. Jalen McMillan. Yeah. And like those are 3 NFL dudes and they have an NFL quarterback. And that provided obviously a lot of struggles for Oregon in both the games that they played against Washington. So the only maybe saving grace for Oregon is that Will Howard, I don't think, is an NFL quarterback. Could somebody take him late in the NFL draft or give him a UDFA deal? Yeah, of course. But Michael Penix was a first-round pick, quote unquote, because it was a very strange decision by the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta Hawks.
It would be a really weird decision by the Atlanta Hawks.
Really
to take
weird.
Michael Penix in the top 10. Yeah, that'd be really.
He's got long arms. I think he could be a good basketball player.
He can block some shots.
Yeah. That might be Oregon's saving grace. Is just that Will Howard just isn't as good of a quarterback as Michael Penix was last year, and can dissect the defense and has the arm to throw over the top. Does he have the arm to throw over the top? Probably. And it's just going to be something I pay attention to immediately. It's like, how does Oregon work with Nico Reed on the outside, where he's going to be going against Emeka Egbuka or Jeremiah Smith, and he is very clearly the weak link in the secondary, at least at the cornerback position. And it's no rub at Nico. I think he's played really well this season. It's intriguing to see how much he's improved since last year. But Jabbar Muhammad is the far superior cornerback. And you can see it with your own eyes. You can see it with all the advanced analytics to tell you Jabbar is better. Like, it is not a hard equation to figure out that Jabbar is better than Nico Reed. So Oregon probably won't be doubling on Jabbar Muhammad's side.
No.
But if they double Nico Reed's side, that's going to leave a one-on-one matchup for one of the safeties against a really good receiver. So that's going to be my biggest thing. And it goes back to the pass rush, because if Oregon can get home with 4 guys, that's great. Because then 7 dudes are dropping back into covers. They can play nickel, they can play dime. I don't think Tosh would ever play quarter, but they can play nickel and dime and drop guys back and give as much help and protection in the secondary as possible with as many defensive backs on the field. It's just, I'm watching the secondary at the very start of the game, and I'm seeing if Oregon can get home with 4 rushers and doesn't have to bring anybody else from the secondary, just so it gives them another chance to do well back there. But I mean, that's got to be my number one. I'm really intrigued to see what happens, and I think that could really shape the game.
Yeah, Patrick Murphy said something very similar, Jared, about Will Howard's ability to throw deep. Like, that was like one of his questions of what can he do throwing the football down the field. And so I agree. I think that's one in which Oregon could maybe get some advantages. If a floater gets out there, what happens? Is Oregon able to go and get it? Are they able to, big hit and, release the football? I'm curious to see how often they blitz early. Is it bring the pressure now to Will Howard right away and try and get it all game, or do they drop back and see if they can generate the pressure or not? And then the run game, obviously we can just talk about everything in this matchup, but like how Oregon handles Ohio State's run game will also dictate how many guys they drop back, as will Ohio State's defense, and if Oregon can run the ball effectively. Because if you can, then that forces the safeties closer to the box, which opens everything else up in the passing game. But it's one, I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts here? Are we more focused on how Oregon defends against Ohio State's offense, or are we more concerned about how Oregon tries to score on Ohio State's offense? I got confidence. I know it hasn't looked good. I have confidence Oregon's offense will score. It's just, can Oregon's defense hold them enough that 28 points or there around is going to be enough to win?
I'm interested just to see how everything plays out, to be totally honest.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, to take a real easy answer, and that's not even in terms of what I think will be more successful. That's just like, this is such a step up in competition that I'm just really intrigued of like what works, what doesn't. I'll be curious to see how much, go back to the coverage thing, I'll be curious to see how much zone Oregon plays.
They play a lot of zone to begin with.
Right. Like, does that just become what you do primarily against this team? I don't know. I'll be curious to see what they do in terms of rotating defensive personnel, because we've seen kind of a 50-50 or close to split with Manning and Reed. Like, do we see Dante Manning play? Like, does one of those guys play 80% of the snaps now? Like, does it feel like you play the hot hand? Do you want to keep rotating? So there's, I think, several things there that are interesting. But what is obvious to your point is that I think there's NFL talent in Oregon secondary, but it's like day 2 and 3 talent, whereas Ohio State has day 1 receiving talent. And that is a difference, because even last year, like, Evan Williams took a lot of heat for some of his play there. That's a guy who's starting for the Packers and playing pretty good NFL football. But against the caliber of receivers and quarterbacks that they were playing on that Saturday, he had a couple of tough moments. Like, I think there could be good players in this Oregon secondary that have a hard time just because you're going against the top tier guys. And so I agree. That's a big question. Jared, do you have a more clear answer to Matt's question about what you're more confident in? Because I probably would lean on more confident in the defense giving Ohio State a hard time, as opposed to Oregon's offense moving it and scoring it every single time downfield, or with a high level of regularity. Because I happen to think Ohio State's pretty damn good on defense. Not that they're not good on offense, but that's why it's a hard question, because they're really good on both.
Right. I think I have more questions on if Oregon could score the ball. I think that Ohio State's secondary doesn't give as much credit as their interior guys do. But it's damn good. I mean, they have a lot of good secondary help. They have a lot of good secondary talent. They can man up. And Oregon's wide receivers are pretty darn good. They're just going to need somebody other than Tez Johnson to step up and do something. And I think that's going to be the problem potentially for Gabriel is when he steps up into the pocket and his safety valve is covered. Those are the situations where a quarterback hurries himself and is like, oh, shoot, I don't have my guy open. Like, I got to go find somebody else. That's when you start seeing the pats in the ball. That's when you start seeing the pump fakes, the change of directions and the eyesight where you just don't know where you're going because who you normally expect to be open is no longer open. So I have some concerns with the offensive ability. And if this game gets close or it gets, like late in the game, if it's a close one, like there's going to be some fourth down decisions too that Dan Lanning is going to have to make that are either going to bring the whole community together or rip it apart. So I think Oregon's offense can score. It's not like they're going to be shut out or anything, but they're going to have to score some points this game.
Yeah.
We've all gotten lucky, or not lucky, but we've all gotten used to Oregon winning by 20 to 30 points because the opposing team scores 6, 10, 14 points. It's not going to happen this week. They're going to need to score some.
Anything else before we dive into break?
No, I mean, I guess just one last thought is like game script. I think it's really important Oregon doesn't get behind a couple scores in the first half. I'm worried about, and we've talked about this from the other team's perspective of playing Oregon from behind. That means you're putting a lot of probably reliance in the pass game, and not that I don't think Oregon can throw the ball because I think they can, but you would like to avoid putting everything on Dylan's shoulders here, and he's a veteran quarterback, and I think he'll probably play a lot better on Saturday than he has. Not even that he's played bad in the last couple of games. I think he'll find ways to eliminate some of those mistakes. But if you are playing with a deficit of 10, 14 points, and you can start to see somebody naturally just kind of press and try to do too much. And I think that's played a role at times for some of the mistakes he has made. So I just think you'd hate for this game to open up the way it has for like the UCLA game from UCLA's perspective, where they're just down a bunch really early and trying to come back. Like you can't let that sort of thing happen. So I think Oregon needs to be sharp early.
Yeah, they need to be sharp early on offense and defense. I mean, obviously, but you can't do what you did against Michigan State, where you have 2 red zone opportunities in the first quarter and you only convert on 1. And then I mean, one of the biggest things for me is how Oregon stops the run. I know we kind of just glossed over it but I do feel like it's an important category to talk about, just because I think Oregon's run defense is really damn good. It's just going to be a real war between Ohio State's really good running back duo and how Chip Kelly uses them, because it's not like Jonathan Smith where it's going to be inside zones or traps or pulling guards and just trying to create offense. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be what we've always known Chip Kelly to be, and that's dial up some interesting play calls that are kind of convoluted and you don't really know where it's going to go at first, but then all of a sudden it's a running back who's running on the outside of the line for 10 to 15 yards. So, and he has 2 incredible running backs at his disposal, which if I'm an Oregon fan, that's kind of scary to me, because a good offensive line, a solid quarterback, and 2 elite running backs for Chip Kelly, it's kind of scary. And I know that offenses have grown to all kind of emulate what Chip Kelly did in the 2010s nowadays, if you have a normal head coach, Jonathan Smith. But this is going to be a really difficult matchup, and you need Oregon's edge guys, the Birches, the Uyungleleles, the Tatum Tuiyotis, to set edges. Because if they don't set edges, this game is over, because Ohio State's just going to run the ball for 300 yards and it's not going to be close. But I don't anticipate that happening, because this is a damn good run defense.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into our game predictions here. All right, welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast, or welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast, not welcome in. Game picks here. Updating the standings before we dive in. Eric's still in first place with a 28-22 record. Jared is 26-24, and I am 22-27. So nothing changed in the standings perspective after last week. Do we want to go? Let's go Eric first, and then Jared, and then I will finish up with the defensive pick. So Eric, why don't you start us off here with the team props?
Just another week for you to catch up, Matt. That's what this is, right?
Sure.
And just another week for me to make a bunch of to screw this up and blow my lead. All right. So I've got the team props this week. More empty red zone possessions, Oregon or Ohio State. The stat for this one is that Ohio State scores every time they reach the red zone. The inverse on that, though, is Oregon has scored every time that they haven't turned it over or knelt. So if Oregon can clean it up, they're pretty good down there, too, is my point, that when they don't cause their own mistakes. But I did go Oregon to have more empty red zone possessions just because Ohio State's been so good. But I don't think it's going to be like 3-1 or something like that. I think it's going to be a game where probably both teams come away with points down there. But maybe is it touchdowns? Is it field goals? That could be what determines this.
Yeah, I went with Oregon as well. They've shown that they can go empty in the red zone, and Ohio State hasn't. So I think it's pretty cut and dry. Matt, you're on mute.
Sorry, I said push. I don't think either team is going to get into the red zone and not score. So I went push.
It's a good answer. This is a bad prop by me. I told the guys before we started recording. In retrospect, I wish I would have picked a different number. But over under 3.5 Duck scoring drives of 10 or more plays. I went over thinking that the game script for Oregon to win would be a lot of long drives. But do I think they're going to have 4 over 10 plays? Probably not. I think they've had like 9 all season or something. I don't know. I didn't actually look into how many they've had. Jared, did you look at how many they've actually had? How crazy is this line?
I did not look into how many they had. I just thought it was a crazy line to begin with. Like Oregon doesn't, like when they're clicking on all cylinders, they do not do this. When they need to waste game clock, like at the end of UCLA and Michigan State, then they can go 10 to 14 plays. So I went under 3.5 drives, mind you, 3.5, not just 1.5, 2.5, 3.5.
If it was 1.5, we'd have a good discussion about it, wouldn't we?
I'd still go under. I don't know if they've done that twice in a game yet this year. I'll go try to find it real quick.
Yeah, go try to find that.
I just pulled up the drive chart, and Oregon had, let me see here, 9.5. So 1, 2, they had 3 drives in the game against Michigan State, where they went 9 play or 10 plays or more. And they had another one that went 9 with a field goal. I also said under though. I don't think it's going to happen.
My thinking, just to convey it a little bit more, is the way Ohio State plays defense also is to take away the big play. And so to drive the length of the field is going to be a lot of short, easy stuff probably, which is how Oregon plays. But it feels high anyway for me. But I'll take the over because I set the line there, and that's what I said. So we'll move on to over under 7.5 total touchdowns scored in this game. I said over, but I actually think this is a decent line just because if you do the math on it, I think the over-under for this game is like 55, 56 points. And if you're doing the math on how you get to that sort of a total, you're going to have 8 or more touchdowns. So I actually did go over in this one, but barely, as we'll get to my score prediction. I have 8 total touchdowns scored in this game.
Yeah, I went over as well. I had thought of my score prediction earlier in the week, so I knew what I was going to have as the final, so I went over.
I went over as well. We'll see some why down the road, but I just think we have 8 total touchdowns in this game.
All right. Am I doing offensive team or offensive individual prop bets now? Okay, let's do it. Tez Johnson, over under 7.5 receptions. He seems to get 8 to 10 every single game. Like I said earlier, I think Ohio State's probably going to try to key in on this and take away Dylan Gabriel's safety valve. I just think Tez is too wiggly. Guy's made out of liquid. I don't think they're going to be able to cover him. So I went over 7.5 receptions.
I actually went under, but your point on because you talked about it earlier about the possibility of Ohio State taking Tez away. I think that's hard to do for a defense. To just like totally remove him. He's so good in space and such a good route runner. But I did go under, and my thinking on this is I think it's imperative if Oregon's going to be really competitive in this game to involve their outside receivers a little bit more. The target share has been crazy the last couple of games. Tez has 28 targets the last 2 games. Trayshawn has 11 and Evan has 9. I think for Oregon to win this game and to play, honestly, for the offense to be at its very, very best, you need a little bit more downfield on the outside. So I went under on this. That doesn't mean I don't think Tez can have a good game.
Yeah, I also went under. I think Ohio State's going to have a ton of attention, and I think Oregon's going to play into that. I think they're not going to go away from Tez Johnson. That would be stupid because he's your best offensive skill guy and your most explosive player. And shoot, he may go over 8 receptions without really being like the heavy focus of this game just because of the way things play out. But I agree with Erik that Trayshawn Holden, Evan Stewart, they need to do more. And some of that is them. Some of that is the game plan. And I think we'll see some of that with the attention that Tez will garnish his way. So I'm taking the under for Tez. But like you, Erik, I think that shouldn't mean he has a poor game. Like, and it won't surprise me if he has 7 receptions and barely gets there.
All right. Jordan James, over under 97.5 rushing yards. James has been really good recently, obviously very good against Michigan State this past weekend. I went under here. I don't know. I just had a gut feeling, which probably means he'll go over. But my gut feeling told me that he'll go under and get like a 90 or 92-yard day, mostly because I think Oregon's going to try to throw the ball a lot. I think they're going to have potentially better success through the air than they are on the ground this week. So I'm going under 97.5 yards for Jordan James.
This is a really hard one. It's a good line.
Thank you.
You know, because you go back and look at the big marquee games, and Oregon's run game has been, even last year, not awesome in a lot of these. And so I'm going to take the over here in part because if I'm thinking about keys for this Oregon offense, it would be to establish this run game, because again, I think if he's, I guess you could establish it with less than 97.5 yards, but if he has like 45 yards in this game's not going Oregon's way, right? So I took the over, but it's right on the verge, and frankly, like, it wouldn't surprise me at all, to Jared's point, if he gets really close, if he's in the 70s, 80s, even low 90s, but not to the 100 mark again, basically.
I took the over. I got a sneaking suspicion that he's going to have a big day. I think Oregon's going to have some success. I think there's going to be, with a lot of attention to Tez, I think Jordan will be a guy that will capitalize on that. But I do think the number is really good because from a over-under perspective, it's going to be right around there. If he hits 100, it's just going to be barely over it. I don't think he's going to go for like 128 and 3 touchdowns or something like that. That's going to be obscene. It's going to be right around 100. I'm taking the over, though. I think he has a good game.
And then finally, for the offense, over under Dylan Gabriel, 275 even passing yards on the day. I went over. Look, if Oregon wants to win this game, they need Dylan Gabriel to be good. And I think that, like I just said earlier, I think they're going to pass a little bit more than maybe some of us expect in this game, even though like the run offense has been pretty good. But I'm going to take the over. I think Dylan has done well in his big games, steps up to the challenge, and I think this is going to be one of them. And if they are going to go on the outside and use the perimeter receivers, theoretically those are deep shots, and those will add up the yardages.
Yep, fair points. I did take the under, but I was thinking just barely. In fact, I probably should have taken the over because I think he's going to throw for probably 250, 260 pretty, I should say easily, because I don't think anything in this game is easy. But that feels like a mark he can reach. But I'll take the under. We'll see. I could be very wrong on this one. Pretty low confidence.
I'm taking the over despite history saying otherwise. Ohio State hasn't allowed a quarterback to throw for 275 in a regular season game since the Michigan game of 2022. They played Georgia in the playoffs and they gave up 398, but it doesn't happen very often that an Ohio State opponent quarterback throws for 275. I think Dylan Gabriel will be one of the exceptions, one of the anomalies, and we'll have a big game. So I'm taking the over. All right, defensive prop bets. Just like Eric with his drive chart, I kind of made this one and then kind of like, I just really wish I didn't do this. Justin Jacobs over 4.5 tackles. I wasn't trying to do Bryce Betcher because I'm kind of tired out of the Bryce Betcher picks. So I went like a big name that I think we all kind of expected would be a starter, a regular contributor, and he's the fourth guy in the rotation. But I think there's going to be opportunities for tackles. This is a game that he should be playing more in. But over, under 4.5 tackles for Justin Jacobs. I took over, and I regret it. I wish I took under.
I'll go. I went under as well. Yeah, I took the under. I thought he played his best game of the season against Michigan State, like in the second half. He did have a couple of plays that weren't perfect. The fourth down scramble that their backup quarterback Schuster, I think, had. That was Justin kind of had an opportunity to top that play before it got going, and he didn't. But I thought he played pretty well. I still just don't know if he's going to play enough to get to that sort of a number. I think 5 tackles, unless he's playing 25, 35 snaps, is probably a little too much. I just don't know if he's that involved.
Yeah, I had the same thought process as I went under. He said 4 tackles 2 of the last 3 games, which is good for him after starting the season kind of slow and not in the rotation. But with Jeff being 100% healthy now, I think that cuts into it even more. So I'm going under.
All right, next one is Jordan Birch. Over under 1.5 sacks. He's averaging 1 per game this season. He's coming off a 2.5 sack performance against Michigan State. I thought this was just like the perfect stat. Like, is he going to go above and beyond what he's done on average per game or be held under that? I'm saying over, under. I do think he has a sack, but I just don't think he gets 2. There's going to be a lot of attention that goes his way. But someone else on the defense will have 2 sacks.
I was going to say, I think if Oregon's going to be really competitive, they have to get to Howard, and they probably do need to get to 4 or 5 sacks in this game, and Birch has been their top guy in that regard. I just think, to your last point there, I think he's going to have a lot of attention, and I don't know if he'll be able to get home that much. And if he does get – so I took the under. If he does get the over, that's going to just continue to kind of build his resume and the expectations for what he can do the rest of the season, because getting 2 or more sacks against this offense – and the talent that they've got would be really impressive. But I did say under.
Yeah, I went under here as well. I think Birch could potentially get a sack this week. I just think not a lot, but I certainly think that part of his 2.5 sacks last week was script design or play design by Jonathan Smith and Michigan State's offense. Those long, drawn-out play actions, like, that gives you just more time for Birch to make a move and get around an offensive lineman. I think it'll just be harder for him to do it this week. I think he'll be disruptive and be in the pass rush game and the run stopping game, but 2 sacks, I feel like it's going to be just difficult based on pure schematics of Ohio State.
All right, next one. Dante Manning, Nico Reed combined over under 3.5 passes defended. That's pass breakups or interceptions. Jabbar Muhammad is going to have one side of the field, I think, I won't say locked down, but he will hold his own. And I think Ohio State will try and do what Washington did the last 2 times that they've played and pick on the other side of the field and go after Manning and Reed. I think by pure just opportunity, I'm going to take the over. They will give up some catches. I think they will give up a big catch, maybe even like an explosive touchdown. But I think just by pure opportunity, the number of targets they're going to get, I'm confident that they'll be able to stop 4 of them.
It's a tough one. I went back and forth. I ended up going over kind of because of volume. I do think they'll be targeted a lot. Now, the question for me is, like, do those targets actually result in interceptions and pass breakups, or do they just result in catches by whoever's over there? But I did go over. I would imagine Ohio State will try to pick on whoever these guys are guarding, or try to pick on these two guys. The other thing that's just in my head is if Ohio State does what it's able to do in this game, I don't know if they'll even need to throw it so many times that they would get that many pass opportunities. But we'll absolutely see what happens. So, but I did take over.
Yeah, I went under. 4 total is a lot, just in general, and obviously it'd be 2 and 2 with each person. But they might get thrown at a lot. This over under means that they're going to actually get a hand and a pass, and that's where I'm a little bit weary of it, because I think that they could just be severely outplayed by Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, whoever's on them. And while they might be in good coverage, I don't know if they're going to get the hand on the pass. So I'm going under.
All right. Last one, and that's the game predictions here. Real quick, before we dive into our picks, when's the last time Oregon's a home underdog like they are today? Do you guys know?
No, I got nothing.
Oh, gosh. This is right on the spot here, and I hadn't had time to think. I'm trying to think of when they would have been a home underdog.
Because that's why I waited, because it's been a while. There's been a lot of games played.
Okay, so is this in the 2020s? This is pre-2020s.
This is pre-2020. Okay. It's been that long.
Okay. You just hit me with it. I don't think I'm going to think of it.
2018 Washington.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that would make sense. I should have said that. Those would be the seasons where that would be possible.
We all know how that game ended. Overtime, CJ Verdell up the middle for the score. I think this game is going to be along the same lines from an excitement standpoint. I'm not predicting a walk-off touchdown. I'm not going to say that. But I think this will rival some of the best games that we have seen played at Autzen Stadium. I've been going to games since 91, and there are a few that have resonated significantly. You go back to Michigan in 2002, the build up for that one. You go to Fright Night in 2009 against USC on Halloween. That game felt like it broke Pete Carroll's soul, and he left the college football shortly after that. You go to that Washington game in 2018, the hype and the excitement of trying to knock off Washington. I think this is going to be a game that rivals that. And it's going to be back and forth. Oregon will trail at some point in this game. Ohio State will trail at some point in this game. And ultimately, I think what ends up being a deciding factor is I think Oregon's defensive line and front seven gets enough pressure on Will Howard to just minimize the impact that Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka can have in the deep passing game. And he won't have enough time consistently to take deep shots. I think the crowd, this is maybe the most anticipated matchup ever at Autzen. I think the crowd's going to be pretty juiced. I think game day atmosphere is going to be pretty wild. I go back to last season against Colorado, and that was wild for a different reason, but it was still just bonkers. This will be on an entirely different level. I think that plays a factor as well into this one. I think Oregon wins 31-28 in a game that will go down as an all-time classic, and everyone will walk out of this saying, awesome game. Those two teams are two of the 4 best teams in college football.
We have the exact same score, Matt. Oregon 31, Ohio State 28. So good by us, perhaps, or maybe very wrong by us. We'll see on Saturday. I don't have a ton of conviction, I'll be honest. I've kind of gone back and forth all week on this, on whether I think this kind of score feels to me most likely in this kind of field goal to a touchdown, kind of low 30s, high 20s kind of score. It just feels to me like the way this game's probably going to play out. The preseason I predicted Oregon would go 12-0, kind of felt like we'll stick with that. And then just there are two things that have been kind of sticking in my mind that I think Oregon has a chance to take advantage of. One is the part Matt just talked about, which is I do think Oregon's defensive line has a chance to really be disruptive in this game. And I think that's their best path to victory, because I think Ohio State, if they're able to just kind of run through what they want to without a lot of challenge and without much disruption, I just think they're going to be able to kind of do whatever they want. But if Oregon's front can do what we've seen them do, especially I think the last 4 weeks, I think there's a chance that Ohio State kind of stumbles a little bit and has some difficulty, and Will Howard is tested, because to me that is still the big question mark I have about Ohio State is how good is Will Howard actually? And we might come out of this game being like, oh boy, was I wrong? And he just lights him up, or he might have some kind of ups and downs. And then the other one was, and I've kind of gone back and forth how much this matters, but the travel part of the statistics early on have pointed to the fact that teams going, 2 or more time zones over just haven't done very well in Big Ten competition. The only team that's won was Indiana over UCLA. And we know UCLA is not a very good football team. So they're 1-8, I think, is the stat I've seen in games like that. So I think that sort of a thing plays. It's a small part, but maybe that gets Ohio State kind of off its A+ game, because I do think like if Ohio State plays its very best and Oregon plays its very best, I think Ohio State would win. I'm relying on Oregon playing close to an A+ game and Ohio State not being quite at that level.
Yeah, I have Ohio State winning 35-28. I think the same kind of reasons that Erik just talked about, where if both these teams play at their best, I think one team is just actually better than the other. And I think that's Ohio State. I think that they're just top to bottom, at least right now, firing on all cylinders better than Oregon is. And, that's what I wrote in our prediction article, where it's like Ohio State might win this one when they are firing on all cylinders, but I still feel like Oregon has a ton of room to improve and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they make up a lot of that ground and where they need to improve and grow in this last week after beating Michigan State and into this weekend against Ohio State. So that could all certainly be true. I just don't think it's going to happen. I am, as somebody who covers the Ducks and has watched this team for the last couple of years, I really think that this secondary problem could be a real issue. And by problem, I mean just one side of the field. And if Oregon can do something about that, if they can double, if they can be effective on that side of the field, I think they have a real chance of winning. But this just like screams flashbacks to Washington last year. And just because of the pure talent on the outside. And it's really hard to be a really good cornerback at the college level against NFL receivers. Like, you only see a handful of them selected like in the top 3 rounds of the NFL draft for a reason. It's because there's just such a huge gap and disparity. And Derek's point about Will Howard and how he plays and if he can be that guy, like I'm still unsure. But if I'm Chip Kelly, I'm not letting the game fall in Will Howard's hands. I'm going to try to establish the run, and I'm not going to run up the middle. I'm going to run to the sides. I'm going to force Oregon to perimeter tackle, which they've shown to be kind of up and down this season against. They were really great against Oregon State and UCLA, not so good against Michigan State last week in the perimeter tackling game. So I'm trying to, if I'm Chip Kelly, I'm trying to move as often as possible and not play into the strengths of Oregon's defense, which is basically kind of right up the middle with Caldwell and Harmon and Bassa and Birch off the edge. So I'm interested to see how Chip Kelly's going to do that. I think this will be a close game throughout. I just think Ohio State's going to score a touchdown late and just take the win. Other than that, I think everybody's going to kind of come away and being like, yeah, these are 2 of the best teams in the country. And if you're an Oregon fan and they do lose, not all hope is lost. There is the potential Big Ten championship game rematch if Oregon does what they're supposed to do the rest of the way. And it's a 12-team college football playoff. So it should be there's still opportunities to do exactly what you want to do from the beginning of the season, even if you lose this weekend.
Yeah, that's the big one, is in today's landscape of college football, that you can lose this game and you can still fight your way back. And I agree with Jared's point of Oregon. Certainly, I think Oregon's ceiling is much higher right now than Ohio State's. Or room to grow. I think Ohio State.
I was going to say, yeah.
I think Ohio State's playing about as close to peak performance as you can for them. They will have areas of improvement, sure, but I think the gap between where they are and where they could be is wider for Oregon. And to his point, maybe we see all of a sudden this week things click. Maybe they've been secretly holding a bunch of their stuff back, and they, just throwing things out.
Yeah, no, I know. I hate those narratives, but I it's possible.
Yeah.
But maybe they just look clean. And they're more importantly, I think my point is when you play inferior talent 5 games in a row, and it's hard to play clean football, perfect football every week. Ohio State has done it. And I think That is what's impressive about them is they haven't really had a dud of a game. Oregon has, but maybe this week it's different. We'll see. That's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Until the next time you hear from us, which will be late Saturday night following the game, we'll have post-game coverage. We'll have lead up to the game on duckterritory.com as well as in-game updates throughout the day on Saturday. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.